All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the annual Capital Planning Summit for the Board of Finance and for the town of Fairfield, actually. Tonight, we'd like to welcome representatives from the Education Administration, Mr. Gerber and Mr. Bateson for representing the RTM, and Mr. Tetreault and his colleagues on the Board of Selectmen will be here shortly. Mr. Tetreault is already here. If everyone would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. And we're actually going to ask our clerk, Mrs. Jennifer Carpenter, to say the Pledge of Allegiance this evening.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So would everyone please remain standing for just a second? We had some sad news the past several days involving two members of the RTM. Mr. Jay Walk lost his mother, and we'd like to extend our sympathies and our thoughts and prayers to he and his family. And Mary McCullough, who was the first female moderator of the RTM, her husband died unexpectedly over the weekend. And I know a lot of our colleagues from the RTM and other boards are currently extending their sympathies to the family in person. We would like to hold a moment of silence in their honor and let them know that we're thinking about them at this time. I thank you very much. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, this is a rather unique meeting for the town. This was something that was put in place 5 or 6 years ago at this point, and it's our annual Capital Planning Summit, where the town administration and the Board of Education get together and apprise the town bodies of the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance and representatives of the RTM chosen by the parties and the moderator to represent their entire board to see what the next several years may look like for the town from a capital perspective. This is very important because a large percentage of the budget, of the town's budget on an annual basis, goes to debt service. And this is the way the town looks at what our priorities are for our facilities and for our capital needs over the next several years. There are projections here of the projects that may or may not go before the town bodies in the coming year, as well as the financial implications of those projections over the next 20 or 30 years or so. And it's a very good management tool, a way we understand when we look at capital projects through the course of the year, how they impact or how they fall into the overall capital plan for the town. I'd like to thank the administration, Mr. Mayor, the Board of Education, their representatives, Mr. Cullen. I know a lot of hard work goes into this. I'd like to thank you for your time and efforts in putting this together for our review. To our colleagues from the Board of Selectmen, the RTM, and the Education Administration and Board of Education, I don't want to call this a free-for-all, but this is an opportunity for everybody to speak and ask questions. So please feel free. This is a collaborative effort, and this is meant to be a discussion, not necessarily just a presentation. So feel free to participate at any given point in time, and welcome to the board. Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it over this time to you so you can walk us through some of the documents that were provided and give any information that you would like.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to reiterate a little bit of what the Chair just indicated, this is a work session. Because something is on the document, in a document, does not mean it is approved, or does not mean it will be approved. This is the requests that have come through, and if all these and the results are and obviously with the assumptions of the interest rates, et cetera, if all these items are indeed approved and funded, and then as most people know, during the year, if something new comes up that's not on here, then we redo these to show the impact and the change in what the current and later debt service amounts would be. There's a couple of things to talk about before we go into the document. There's the stuff that's that's, one item that's not on here. Just want to make sure everybody's aware that it's kind of lurking, but it's not on here because it's in the early stages, and there's so many variables as to where it goes and what potentially would happen. But we do have Station 4 Firehouse that is in need of some renovation or replacement, or depends on who you talk to, and that potentially could be a very large number in the $2 to $3 million range. But it's too early, not enough information to be thinking about including it here. A second item that will probably be addressed in the future is the relocation of the IT department. That is not included here, but it's again too early. You know, where we go, what we do, because it's not just moving furniture and moving systems. It's, you know, it's running lines and that type of thing, and so that's not on here as well. Couple of things that also want to address initially. The fire trucks are on here based upon information that was provided at a certain point in time, and the number of fire trucks are correct, the amounts are correct, but some of them, at this point, per the latest fire vehicle replacement schedule, should be a year earlier. Additionally, there's a police boat on here for I think $200,000 or $220,000. The police department has applied for a grant, and it appears that that grant will be successful, so that amount will be reduced as well. In conjunction with the request of the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen to fund DPW vehicles out of the operating budget, there's one, the phase-out plan is such that there's one vehicle for next year, and after that there's zero. The telephone system is in here. We anticipate proceeding with that relatively soon. Okay, with that, I will go to the, also the other thing that we're going to be looking at today that we haven't looked at in the past is kind of a very, I don't know, it's not even a draft, it's just kind of a working document with respect to the Water Pollution Control Authority. That was brought up, I believe, not I believe, I know it was brought up, I just don't remember when, as something that this board would like some information on. So we have presented to you in your handouts a WPCA capital plan, which is based upon the very early cost estimates of capital improvements that need to be made between now and 2031. Total is about $44 million. There's about $10 million in grant opportunities. And this particular evaluation analysis shows this being funded by WPCA service fees. So that's something that's new to this effort and this discussion. So if we go to the handout that has the waterfall on it, it's labeled Exhibit 1. I want to go to this, actually Exhibit 2, if you just flip one page, just to give an overview with the changes, and we'll go through those a little bit. You can see, based upon the capital plan of September 2014, is the one column that has the debt service estimates by year. Second column has the new number, and the third column has the change. As you can see, there's, from a relative perspective, given the size of our budget, there's no real significant change until fiscal year 21, where there would be a jump of $1,800,000. But you can also see when you look at these, There is fluctuation in the debt payments, like from 16 to 17, it goes up $800,000, then it goes up, $1,000,001. I am, as I think I've mentioned this probably before, in looking at different ways to reduce the volatility of our debt service. And that'll be something that we'll be talking about in the future with respect to the issuance of bonds and bonds and the strategy that surrounds those activities, so that this would not be as erratic year by year and have that erratic impact on the on the budget, plus or minus. If you go to Exhibit 3.
Wait, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I'm going to come back. I just want to go to Exhibit 3 very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. Exhibit 3 is, and I'm going to do this, this is the detail of the pluses and the minuses. And I just wanted to point out very briefly that a lot of the changes are increases and decreases in previously submitted projects. The major impact of new items is bridges and flood hardening and storm Sandy things. And the other real big one is the police radio system, which I'm sure you'll be addressing some questions to Chief McNamara on that. But it was in last year $2 million, and it's in this year $4 million. Okay, so going back to Exhibit 2 then. So we have the top part, as I indicated, which shows the debt service, scheduled debt service, projected debt service, based upon last year's cap plan versus this year's cap plan. And then if you go down to the next section, you have the change in the town projects which goes from capital projects from $29 million to $43 million, and the non-recurring for a change of, from 40 million, the total of the non-recurring and capital of $40 million to $43 million, for a net increase after reimbursements of $3 million. The Board of Ed, net increase of $7 million, for a total net increase of $10 million. So with that intro, I will open up. And one other thing, if you want to look at the last page, Exhibit 6, that shows the debt service as a percentage of budget with an assumption of a 2% budget increase per annum. You can see we're currently at 8.46, and it's inches up to 9.85, and then it goes back down. All right. And with that, I'll open it up to questions on this part, and we'll talk about WPCA later.
Mr. Mayor, before I turn over the board members, so what Exhibit 2 is saying is that, well, debt service costs over the next 10 years or so, I guess, no, actually, I'm sorry, over the next 30 years or so, 20 years or so, go down by 2.7 million. Our actual capital projects go up by about 10 million, is that right?
That is correct.
So is that just the timing of those capital projects and these going off the schedule, or?
It is primarily the timing of the capital projects combined with our interest rates that we're using through 2024 are at 4%, and we go up at 4%. I think we used 4.25% last year, but I don't remember exactly. That's
Okay, so you have our
question. So those are the two impacts. So it's interest rates and timing.
Okay, so if
And
I go to,
interest rates haven't moved as dramatically as we thought they were going to last year. If you remember, last year was like everybody was, not everybody, but the marketplace, the financial marketplace was thinking that inflation was going to rear its ugly head and interest rates were going to.
Okay, so if I go to Exhibit 1, the cash flow, just to, so we have heavy cash outflows in 2015-16 of 17.9, correct?
Correct.
And then additional cash outflows in 17-18. We go down one for a year, and then we go up to 27 million, right?
Correct. 26 million.
What's that balloon of 26 million? Do you know?
If we go to Exhibit 4, and we're looking at 17-18.
I'm trying to find it. Yeah, I was trying to tie it out.
Right, Exhibit 4, the first page of Exhibit 4.
Right.
That's
I was
the
looking
year
for
that Penfield is currently scheduled. And we have the Duck Farm Bridge, Valley Road Bridge, Old Town Hall renovation. Old Town Hall and Penfield combined is $10 million alone. You have the South Pine Creek Dike, $2 million. And we have the phone system, which is in there.
Okay, so how do I, my apologies, I'm having problems tying to your 26 to 18. Is Board of Ed separate?
Theoretically, if the numbers work, the town for 2017-18
Okay, I
would
see
be
18031.
20 million. Should be 23 million in capital projects.
Yeah, no, I know, I just don't.
Well, I see your problem. Yeah, let's see.
Is there an error?
7, 8, 9, 10. Let me. Well, you have 13 million in capital projects. You have $7 million in non-recurring projects. That should be 17 million. And the 17 million is right there.
All right, I don't want to bog us down here. If you
Yeah.
can just check that. It looks like it might be.
Yep. If you have, well, that's.
Do we have something there?
Well, no, I'm just checking. I was just wondering if somehow the wrong front page, because of the many iterations, got sent out with the package. So I was looking at the other years as well.
Right.
Can I?
Yes. Go ahead.
So, on Exhibit 4, as Mr. Mayor is saying, on the first page, all the way to the right, the top and bottom charts are 2017 and 2018.
Correct.
It appears as if the capital over $1 million projects are replicated on the bottom as well. So Penfield, Duck Farm, Old Town, and South Pine Creek. So if you take that out and then add that to the 17 million, I think you get to 26, Bob. See what I'm saying? There's a box up on top that says 2017, 2018.
Yep.
There's a box on the bottom, and there's four pretty, well, $13 million worth of projects that are replicated.
Right.
So if you take 13 out of 18, that's 5. That gets you, that's like 22. So, but there is a duplication here. I don't know if that's the whole thing or not.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm checking the schedule for completeness, right? And I'm seeing 15 and 16.
15 million. That's 15.
Then I'm seeing 16, 17, and 17, 18 is a big jump. I'm right in saying, though, the first few years of this should be,
Well, wait a second, I'm sorry. The bottom is Board of Ed and town combined. I'm sorry. The bottom is Board of Ed and town combined. The top is, the middle is the town. So it's the middle section. I got confused there for a second. I'm sorry.
that's okay.
The middle section is the town piece. So for 17, 18, the middle section, the town total cash flow required should be 18,031.
Which it is,
Which it is. Yeah.
but we don't have the Board of Ed piece as part of the exhibit.
Or Board of Ed, but we do have the Board of Ed.
No, but it's not part of the exhibit,
Not
it's
part of-
separate.
Yeah, that's the colored exhibit that you have.
That's what I was trying to put together.
Oh.
Was delivered to
So
your
it's going
house.
17,
Oh,
8,
oh, oh.
7, 26, 10, 7, 17. It's pretty lumpy, is what we're saying. The cash out the door is pretty lumpy.
Correct.
And just for clarification, two items that are not included in these projections right now are the relocation of the IT department, which could be a couple $1 million, and the Firehouse 4 renovation,
Correct.
which we don't have a number on.
Correct.
Do we have a timing on that or anything like that? Is that something that's urgent?
There, we have a new chief starting next month, and we're looking to
that
get
somewhere.
some significant input from him.
Yeah.
And there has been a joint committee of the volunteers and the paid, what is that the right word? Paid? Career. Thank you. And the career firefighters and that have been meeting, and they've actually done a lot of work. And the preliminary numbers are, in the high, 3 million range. There's potential grants out there that will be investigated. We'll get Chief McCarthy's input on, because there's problems, on what he thinks is the best way to go. Obviously, there's multiple options. One, sell it. One, and buy another piece of property somewhere else. Two, renovate it. There are apparatus fit issues that need to be addressed with the new apparatus that the fire department is purchasing to optimize their operational effectiveness and efficiencies. But the committee has been meeting, and I think there will be a package waiting Chief McCarthy when he arrives.
Okay. Thank you. So we've got 10 million, the upshot is, on these exhibits, from a planning perspective, is we have $10.3 million of more projects over the prior year.
I'm sorry.
The upshot is we've got $10.3 million more in projects over the prior year, whether that's driven by new projects or changes in estimates of existing projects, correct?
Right, and what I can't tell you is how much we lopped off and how much we added. But the last year is, as you can see, the last year is $5 million. I don't know what we lost in the year we lost.
Do we have, hello, Ms. Martin. Do we have questions from board members and others around the table? Mr. Walsh?
Bob, one of your assumptions that you mentioned was in regards to the WPCA schedule that you supplied, is that all of this additional work that needs to be done there, this $40 million worth of work,
Yes, sir.
is going to be paid out of sewer use fees.
That's
Has
the
that been an
assumption in this.
administration decision, or how is that going to work? Because in previous times we've done this, we've bonded it. So I guess the question is, if we change that or we change a portion of that, that's going to dramatically affect these numbers. It's a lot of money.
The most communities and Mr. Michelangelo might be able to speak to this with more relevant, not more relevant, but more exacting numbers. Most communities view sewer systems as utility, like electrical, water, gas, oil, etc., paid for by the users. You know, if you have a septic tank, you pay for your septic tank. You pay to replace your septic tank. You have your well, you pay for your well. So this is modeled based upon that assumption. Obviously, that assumption was for modeling purposes only. There is the Water Pollution Control Authority Commission. There is the First Selectman and the administration, and those issues will be discussed over time. One of the documents that I inserted in that package is page 3, which has a representation of some of the towns, and the far right column there is sewer rates as a percentage of Fairfield, and you can see that, you know, Bechtel's 208, Bridgeport 205, Brookfield 135, Danbury's only 79%, Darien 186%, Newtown 201%, Reading 463%. So if you take an average of these, you can see that we are kind of, I don't want to say under the market, but under the usual, under what's normative out there in the marketplace. So what we did then, what you see on the long sheet, is we started out with the current rate, and we said, okay, what rate increases would be required to fund this fully inside with limited bonding, and would we be out? Would our rates be outrageous, or would they still be in line? So we were starting out with a lot of people that have double or paying half what we're paying. We're paying half. There other people paying twice as much. Gives us a lot of room to move our rates to be, you know, in kind of the normative range, if you will. You see that requires. We got three years of 8%, and then 2%, and then 2.25%, and we're borrowing, and they're borrowing a total of $10.5 million in fiscal years ending 2022 and 2023. Obviously, if a different model was used, it'd be a different result.
Well, I guess this is a conversation for another day, but while I understand what you say most communities have done, our community has had a history of doing something else, which the last time we had a major renovation of that facility, we bonded it because this town made a decision that we thought this benefited the entire town.
Yeah,
I'm not done.
I'm sorry, you paused. I thought
Not just the users, but it benefited the entire town. And I think that's something we're going to have to look long and hard about. As for our rates and what their percentages are, I don't think that's a bad thing that we're below what other towns are. And I can't say that I would support or would at least I would speak to the commission about support 8% increases for a 3-year period of time. That's a large increase, a rate increase for 3 years in a row. And I think we're going to have a broader discussion about this, but potentially, if we decide to do what we've historically done, then, you know, that could significantly change this capital plan.
A couple of comments, Mr. Walsh. One, if you may not remember that this board, specifically the chair of the board at one of the meetings, requested that we do something, that this was an issue that needed to come forth. So this is basically a model that's developed, given what's kind of normative in the nation. Actually, it was not meant to be a recommendation or a suggestion. It's simply a model. With respect to the comment about it being a change in philosophy, a lot of communities, when they build the initial plant, that will be a shared full town expenditure budget item with both users and town paying. But it's kind of falls under a different category when it's a renovation, when it's because this is not new. This is not new facility. This isn't improving anything. This is maintaining the current ability to serve the current users.
I'm going to go, Mr. Tetro had his hand up, and then I'll go and see Mrs. Leclerc. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, one of the, I think, key points is that we've tried to get all the projects laid out in the plan. What the current discussion is about is how those are funded. We've got a lot of work to do in terms of the plan itself, and one of the projects coming before the boards now is to hire a consultant to help us map all that out. I think Mr. Walsh correctly points out, and as we've identified a couple points during the last year, that there is a question about how this is funded. As you might expect, it's somewhat gray in state statutes, which leaves it open to attention. But you've got state statutes, you've got our town charter, and you have the WPCA commission that is going to have to weigh in on this. So between now and when we start those projects in a big way, we certainly have to answer those questions.
Mrs. Leclerc.
Isn't the town also a significant user of,
I assume the schools
schools, town
primarily,
buildings?
and town buildings and fire department. Yes.
So would they pay a portion of this and would not be allocated
Yeah,
to
that's
the
one of the
town?
things. In other words, if it goes through your tax base, then your nonprofit users don't pay.
Or specifically, in this case, if I might jump in,
Yeah.
Fairfield University is probably the largest user outside the town, and the state, surprisingly, is a big user due to the rest areas on I-95. And if we pay for these through taxes, those two users do not incur any cost.
So there's many considerations.
What could be interesting, and this is the right discussion to have, and I know we're going to have this at the appropriate time with more information. What could be interesting is a question of, to your points, whether it is all or nothing. So whether does it get split, and we say a portion of it the taxpayers pay for through their taxes for the exact reasons as Mrs. Leclerc brings up, the town uses it and stuff like this, and then another portion of it, whatever that percentage is, who knows, gets paid for by the ratepayers who are actually directly benefiting, including the universities and the not-for-profits and the state who utilize the facility. I mean, is that something that's beyond logic?
No, not at all. There's many ways to model this.
So in that case, for purposes of modeling it here, you have not put it on the town side, but you are calling out the fact that we have this rather large capital project that in some way, shape, or form, we're going to have to pay for. Is that a fair? and then
Correct.
I-
That, and everybody has visibility on it now, so everybody's
Correct.
aware. We have to answer those questions before we get to those years so that we're incorporating that right. But we need to do something to make sure it's literally on the table for discussion.
Thank you.
No, I don't have the numbers to recall right now, but the town does pay for water from the perspective that it subsidizes WPCA to a certain amount, but I can't remember what that amount is. That'd be up to Chris DeWitt to have.
Throw it on my bag tonight.
Mr. Becker.
Thank you. So, just, and I understand that when this came up in a previous, I think our regular meeting earlier in the month, that we're going to obviously, with the many factors and ordinances and laws that are out there, but if the WPCA put these bonds forward, since we haven't done that really in the past, is that still going to have to come through all the other boards because it puts the town realistically at that position?
It would be my understanding at the moment that as much as the WPCA is technically allowed to issue bonds, that I believe the town would be subject to guaranteeing them because we would be in essence taking on the liability or the obligation, even if we never paid a penny,
Yeah, that's where I was going.
that I believe it would go through the boards. That would be my expectation.
Yeah, there are some cities, I think Stanford's an example, where the WPCA is strictly a separate enterprise. They can issue revenue bonds on their own without city guarantee. Our WPCA is not that separate or distinct, so I don't know what the real answer is, but I think Mike is correct. But there are WPCAs that can and do issue their own bonds guaranteed by the revenue stream.
Mr. Tetra?
And I was just going to say, it is in the plan or thought process to have a charter revision at some point during the next year. And given the lack of clarity, and as Mr. Walsh pointed out, we did some things in the past, we're looking at some things different. The issue is what do state statutes allow/require? What do we expect of our WPCA? I mean, one of my expectations, and I can't go back and tell you when, was that the WPCA was self-funding. Just kind of expected that. And when I go back and look for it, I can't find any written justification. I can't see anywhere it says that. Something like that we may choose to clarify in our charter so that we're not left to the whims of state statute or different bodies going through. Perhaps, Mr. Flynn, allowing for your point that it might be subject to, let's say, the Board of Finance, allowing to go 50-50 on something it was deemed appropriate to do that, but that short of that, but that could be a discussion we have leading up to the charter revision and as part of that.
Thank you, Mr. Tetra. Any
I-
other comments on this?
Follow
Oh,
up
I'm
just
sorry.
to-
you're not-
Yeah, no worries. But the other question is going to be that since we're going to be, unlike perhaps like Stanford, we have a guarantee on that. When we look at the debt to budget, I'd be curious, and we don't have the answer tonight, that's fine, but how that affects it. Obviously, we're looking at that 8% range. We layer these bonds on top of it. Does it somehow have to, when we get to the, to the broader report on the, on the town side, does that somehow, factor in and then have a ratings impact? Or perhaps as we look at, trying to address that, does having someone on the WPCA side assist us by taking it off of our shoulders there? So I'd be curious if, you don't
Yeah, I
have
would-
the answer now.
I would
obviously.
think we'd have the opportunity to look at other municipalities and how they do it. We're not the first town to have this issue.
Yeah.
I would also think that 8% range, or 10% range that sometimes we've heard the rating agencies look at, is also based on tax dollars. And if we had additional revenue sources, that might not have the same weight. But I haven't specifically talked to the rating agencies about that, so I don't mean to project that as their opinion. Just, it's a different formula than just using tax dollars.
Oh, no, yeah, we talk about percent of budget, but this whole thing would be removed from the budget, so perhaps it's not, so definitely. But I throw that out as something that would be a point of consideration, but otherwise I'm all set.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh?
I just want to, you raised an interesting nuance that I did not know about. So if we have WPCA pay for these bonds, we can then charge Fairfield University, Sacred Heart University, the town would then pay their fair share,
No.
and also the Board of Education would have to pay their fair share for the buildings that they use, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Kind of, it's not that we'd be changing the formula for them. The question is the source. If it's from WPCA funds, those are paid for by users, which is set by their water use fee. Fairfield U is our #1 water user, so they would pay the biggest share of that. If it's paid for by taxes, Fairfield, and I'm not picking on Fairfield U, they're a great corporate citizen, I don't mean to do that, but the mechanics are, they're a not-for-profit, they don't pay any taxes.
Hmm?
So in essence, the rest of the taxpayers would pay for that.
But also the town would have to pay as a large user, correct?
I think we do some trade-offs with the WPCA right now,
Right.
so I'm not sure it's dollar for dollar
Okay.
on that. But certainly, in the midst of all this, we'd look at that formula again.
Mhm.
But certainly, the state with I-95 doesn't pay a penny in taxes.
Okay.
And they would pay if it's part of the water usage fee.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Bateson?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to urge caution on Mr. Mayor's statement about collecting sewer fees from exempt properties such as Fairfield U. We don't bill them now.
Yes, we do.
We do?
Yeah.
We bill them for operational costs?
No,
We collect sewer rates from them?
Step back. The WPCA charges sewer fees that's based on water usage to everybody that uses water and sewer.
I'm talking about the incremental difference for the bonds. They don't, if the town bonds it and accepts the whole bonds in the general fund, then the town absorbs 100% of the bonding and cost of that improvement. If we incorporate it into the rates, then they would pay their share.
Okay, I
Roughly
just,
usage.
I thought their sewer use fees were covered under pilot. That's not the case? Okay, all right, I stand corrected.
Sit, actually.
It doesn't, and just be clear, it doesn't roll through the town general fund. It goes into the WPCA.
Okay. If you guys are saying, oh, so it's true, I'll check later on. I just, I sat on the board, I never remember, I remember there was a top 10 list, and several of those we didn't collect because they were tax exempt.
We have openings coming up if you'd like some more experience.
I'll pass on that one, thanks.
Any other comments on this? It's a good discussion.
Yeah, one point of interest, that
Yeah.
the top number on the long sheet on the WPCA, on the last column, their current fund balance is in excess of $4 million.
Thank you. Let's turn our attention back to the original documents. And what I'm going to do is just call exhibit by exhibit and ask if anybody has any questions on that, just in an effort to move us along. Okay? Exhibit 1, which is the cash flow schedule that we referred to earlier. Any questions or comments on that? Mr. Walsh?
Can I ask just a global question? I guess this is to Bob and to Mike. When this was being prepared and these projects were being sorted out on what was going to be applied, was there an assumption that was made at all in regards to what you wanted the total debt amount to be, or was this just a wish list of projects that got whittled down by the administration? I'm trying to figure out how this all got put together. What is the process for putting that? Is it setting a certain debt limit? Is it priority of projects? Is it a wish list? How do you put this together for stuff going forward in the future globally? If you can explain that to us.
Bob,
Jim.
do you want to start with that? You want me to start with that?
You can go.
Okay. I think, as Mr. Mayor pointed out to start, this is a working document, and this is part of an ongoing process. So that we're sitting down with department heads, and much the same as the Board of Ed does, a little more formally on their side, and, in terms of taking votes by the Board of Ed. We're mapping this out based on when we need things and when ideally they would come in. Then we're going back and massaging that a bit to take a look at what's hitting, what is, and kind of what is that doing to the debt load at any point. As part of that process, that's why Mr. Mayor's going back and looking, part of what is driving the debt service up and down, as we had extensive conversations on in the spring, is how much are we banning, how much are we bonding, are we bonding every other year, which is going to cause artificial ups and downs as we go through this. Bob is taking a look at, are there ways to smooth out that process, which lets us plan a little bit better on this side and manage to the debt load number. So with that kind of an intro, I'm going to let Bob pick it up from there.
Yeah, and there's some things that people came forth with that are not in this schedule because it didn't make, I don't want to say it didn't make sense. It just, after further discussion, decided not to move forward on. But the majority of what people brought forward is in here. Some of the stuff is tied to vehicle replacement plan for the fire department. A lot of it is like the police department's $4 million with respect to the radio system. It's, as I understand it, the current communication system they use may be radically changed. They may lose their bandwidths, so they're going to have to like implement a brand new system. $4 million is hopefully a conservative number, because that. But we definitely wanted to put something in there. But at this point, there hasn't been enough work to really figure it out. There is for example, there's $100,000 for fiscal year 18 for a consultant to work with the police department and the town to get a better handle on what the real number would be. The IT, our servers, they have a lifespan, so those are definitely necessary. I make an assumption, I've never really asked Mr. Michelangelo, but the bridges that are in here, there's significant dollars on bridges, Duck Farm Bridge, Valley Road Bridge, the dikes, that those are necessary for safety, public safety, and their lifespan is up. There's not, when you exclude those, then you have, the bigger item that would probably be discretionary would be the clubhouse, the golf clubhouse renovation, which is in there, I think, at $3 million, if I remember correctly. Phone system, some would say that's discretionary, but one day that phone, somebody's going to call somebody, and it's not going to work. But so a lot of it is public safety, bridges, dikes, tide gates, fire trucks, but could the stuff be moved forward, moved off? I'm sure it could. There's also, I think, 150,000 here, for example, for the senior center renovation design, and I don't remember exactly how much is actually in there for the senior center renovation. But yeah, so most of the stuff is past the muster test, if you will, needs to be done. It'd be a matter of timing, if anything.
Can I, and then I want to go to Mr. DeWitt after Mr. Walsh is satisfied. Are you good for a second, Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask one further question in regards to that response in general, in
Go ahead.
regards to the Board of Education. So then you, in addition to the things you discussed, you then work with the Board of Education, and they tell you what their needs are based on their plan. And depending on where those numbers are falling from year to year, you ask them to move certain projects from this year to the next year or whatever, or do you give them a certain amount of money, or how does that work?
One, I'm going to say yes, and very definitely. I mean, we've done that within the year as certain projects, like I think at the time Riverfield was, I think originally in this plan for $9 million. When we finally brought it to the jumping off point, it was closer to $14 million, as I remember. So the board worked with the Board of Ed, and they adjusted other projects to make sure that didn't drive up the debt service number over these. Going forward, I think one of our goals is to manage to the debt service number so that we don't have any gyrations on the tax rate that are uncalled for as part of this. There may be exceptions to that, but that is the target. Bob, do you want to address it beyond that?
Well, yeah, we said the Board of Ed, I've had absolutely no input on what they want to do. I have made requests that they have addressed with respect to timing.
Okay.
And pursuant to Exhibit 6, when you're trying to, you seem to be trying to keep the debt service number between, in later years it's out in the 6 point something. As we get out to 2023, 2024, 2025, but it seems to go between, average around the 8.5% range, a little bit above, a little bit below, except for 2020/21, where it goes up to 9.85. Now, in regards to the percentage of budget, are the budget increases presumed to be 2%?
Correct.
Okay. So as long as we stay within 2% and these projects come in at the approximate numbers, these numbers should be pretty accurate.
If you would like to make the numbers better, just increase the budget more.
Yeah. Or we could just keep it at 2% increases going forward, which would probably make a lot of people happy too.
Yes, sir.
And keep it the way it is. Okay, thanks.
As has been pointed out from time to time during these discussions, for the next 2, 3, 4 years, you've got a pretty good look at these numbers. Once you get out 10 years or more, you're looking at both what are the interest rates, what has happened to the budget increases, and also what's happened to the cost increases in terms of the projects we're talking about.
Mr. DeWitt, did you have something?
No, I think Mr. Mayor answered it. My comment was just going to be, again, the leveling effect in 2017, 2018. It just seems in 2017, 2018, that might be a little more difficult. If all those projects really have to be done there because
the Duck Farm Bridge and the Valley Road Bridge are just going to like fall in if we don't do them by that year, and you're right. I guess my comment would be 2021, where we're starting to see another spike. That's the stuff we can start pulling in, because, I mean, in 1920, we have $600,000. So it doesn't appear as if there's been any smoothing like we hear all the time, right? And we haven't heard of Board of Ed yet, but I reviewed this when I got it in the package. It would seem like there's definitely some smoothing that can be done there. It's less erratic than the town, but it's still kind of, it's like a sawtooth, right? It's, seems like that could be worked on as well. So.
Yep, there are two components. And Mr. DeWitt, I think you hit the nail on the head. What you're talking is just the benefit of this whole waterfall chart that Mr. Flynn led the initiative to put together, is we get to look at that, see what the impact is. Because there are two
absolutely.
things. There are two things that are part of that. One is, what do we put in terms of new building projects? But also, how do we bond it on the back end? And again, that's what Mr. Mayor's working on, to kind of smooth out the bonding, because part of our up and down is caused by we bond every other year.
Yeah.
So as long as we're doing that type of bonding, and we are at the point that we may be big enough and may be able to financially sort out how best to do that, to kind of smooth it on the back end a little bit too.
Yeah.
Because part of this we're doing to ourselves because of how we bond it. You can imagine the jump if we bonded once every 5 years, as
Right.
opposed to every other year.
Well, and it's kind of appropriate to the discussion we had, or what was it, 2 weeks ago we were here, about 10-year, 20-year, what are we going to, that could definitely have some effect on,
Yeah.
I don't even remember what we were talking, I guess Penfield we were talking about, right? How do we do that?
Penfield, the WPCA.
Oh, WPC, yeah, right.
And if you go back 10 years, before we had a waterfall chart, we weren't having that discussion.
Right.
So I think that's the power of this
Yeah.
document and this process, is we don't have to answer
I
that
agree.
tonight, but it gets it on the table for everybody here.
So, Mr. Mayor, just so that I make sure, and thank you, Mr. Tetra, thank you, Mr. DeWitt, to make sure that I understand the way this was developed, let me put it in as layman terms as I can. You start out, when you prepare for this, with projects that we've already approved and are in some aspects either bonded or to be bonded, but they've worked their way through the process. Those are layered in here into all the documents.
That's great. If you look at, for example, the,
Well, let me finish. I'm on a roll here. So,
I'm just going to, go ahead.
so then the next thing you do is you actually say, okay, these various departments have various plans that they've submitted, capital replacement plans. And those are then put into the schedule as, these are what the plans are going forward. Correct statement?
Correct.
Then you go back to the department heads and you say to all the department heads, give me a schedule of the projects that impact your area that are larger than your plans, right? You're larger than your replacement plans. And these would be items that would go in non-recurring, as well as large capital projects that need to be completed. Firehouse renovations, sewer things, DPW leading the effort in a lot of this, correct?
Correct.
It sounds like those are then evaluated, some are thrown out, most are accepted and thrown on the schedule. Accepted from the standpoint of they're going to be included in this model. Is that fair?
Correct.
All right. Then you go over to the Board of Education, you say, give us your capital facilities plan. And for lack of a better word, there's some haggling that goes on there in terms of timing of some of those projects in order to get the financial result that you want. Is that correct?
Correct. To help smooth a little bit, yes.
Okay. Then there's an interest rate that is accepted as a projection, in this instance, 4% in the early years and a higher percentage in the later years. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then there's, to Mr. Tetro's points, there's some assumptions made about when things are going to be bonded to deal with the projections and the lumpiness.
Right now, this assumes that things will be bonded as they are paid for.
Okay. Okay, so that's the projection right now. So as they're paid, so that's not every 2 years, that's every year?
Well, no, within every 2-year bonding.
Okay,
And
so there
also-
is an every 2-year bonding.
Every 2-year
included.
bonding implicit in here. And additionally, there is I don't know what the right word to use is, our band strategy,
Right,
which I'm looking at.
that get rolled over and then,
Well, the bands actually, that's one of the major reasons of the fluctuations, actually. If you look at the bands, most of the items that get banned have 20-year lives.
right,
There's some 10-year stuff in there. Most of it's 20 years. But the policy for the town has been to pay those off 0% the first year, 0% the second year, 5% the third year, 5% the fourth year, and then 90% the fifth year. And I'm not sure why that started, and nobody can really tell me. What I was told actually is somebody was trying to save a tax rate increase one year, so they did that. But there's no, so we are paying a lot of 20-year capital items off in 5 years. And there's no reason to not, bond every year, and there's no reason to pay all those things off in 5 years.
So what
And
is
there's
the
no reason
schedule?
And there's no reason to pay 90% of it in 1 year.
Right. So what does this schedule assume relative to that
This
issue?
schedule assumes current practice.
Okay, so it assumes the 5,590.
The 005590. yes, sir.
005,590.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so there's some latitude there from the standpoint of financing.
Right, yeah, well, actually, one of the things I've pulled up today, but didn't get time to look at, I've pulled up the past, the non-recurring bond, the non-recurring piece bonds that are out to see if that's actually written in the resolution that it has to be paid that way, or we can change it going retro as well as forward.
And?
I pulled it up today, I didn't have a chance to look at it.
Okay, all right. So we might have some flexibility there.
Yeah, so-
But that's the way these documents are put together. Is that a fair statement? the
Right.
way it- Okay, does anybody have any questions on that process?
And the only thing I was going to add before the question is, if you look at the first page of Exhibit 4, well, you see on the top left, you see the A's and the P's. The things with the A's are the ones that are already
Already
approved.
Yep.
The
Thank
P's
you.
are proposed, and
Thank you, Ms.
Just so I understood what you were saying, so the 005590,
That's how they pay off the
that's how
bonds.
we pay off something that's been
That's how we
bonded
pay
for
off
20 years?
That's how we pay off the non-recurring portion of our bonds.
Okay. And we don't have to do it that way, you're saying? We could
No.
just, traditionally, we've done it that way.
Thank you. Is that good? Any other questions? Mr. Bateson?
Just quickly, Bob, you said non-recurring bonds. Did you mean non-recurring capital projects?
I mean, the bonding for the non-recurring capital projects, yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, so that was Exhibit 1, plus the methodology of which all these were put together. Exhibit 2, are there any questions there? Seeing none, and I'm not trying to rush, so if you need to go back, feel free. Let's go to Exhibit 3, which is the listings. Mr. Mayor, this is the listing of the plus and minuses.
Plus and minuses changed. I'm going to do this different next year. I'm going to do one that just changes, like, if you look down, some say decrease, increase, and some say new. Next year, I'm going to break out the increases and decreases, two separate schedules. But, yeah, it's by year. So some items will be on here twice because it's a decrease in 1 year, or removed in 1 year and added in another year.
What's interesting about this schedule to me, and I'm going to use a word here, and I don't mean it as an intentional word, but it's misleading because a lot of the reduction in year over year is kind of a directive of a change in accounting policy related to how we acquire DPW equipment, right?
Well, no, it's right, because in 14, we did not have the current motor vehicle strategy to pay for it all out of operations. We
Right.
don't have that strategy, so we've removed those.
So if it weren't for that, right, which lowers what we intend to capitalize here, the actual increase year over year would be much higher. That's my point.
That is a correct statement. It's about $600,000 a year or something like that.
Right. Over 30-odd years or whatever, right?
Forever.
Right. Mr. Becker.
And I was gonna wait until we got kind of down to Exhibit 6, where it talks about the percentages, but it should just be a bit of a focus that as we strip stuff out, to just be cautious not to layer ourselves, right back into that, that 8% range. I mean, one of the goals was to take some of this stuff out to reduce the bonding amount. So it seems as though it's dipped a little bit, but obviously there's some stuff that comes in, and we know that that's the ebbs and the flows. But as we start to try to shift stuff out, I would think that there should be kind of a new, slightly lower target percentage, perhaps, because otherwise you're just taking the stuff out, putting in the budget to free up room to just to bond more, I guess.
Well,
That,
Well, not to
I might-
bond more.
There's,
yeah,
there's math.
I know there's a delicate balance, so.
Well, if you take $1 million out of non-recurring or bonding, and you want to include it in the budget, you have to increase the budget by $1 million.
Yep.
So that's the math part. The fact that that $1 million increased the budget $1 million, it really freed up $100,000 or for additional bonding. So
Yep.
to the extent you're right, I'm not sure that's a driver in terms of the overall debt service, but I think you comprehend the math correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and for, and some of the stuff, like, for example, the second highest year for the town is fiscal year 2021, and that's the biggest item in that specific year is, this would be one of the discretionary items, I think, but not to some people. It's got $5 million in there for the beach area flood protection concept that's being put together by that committee.
And on that, if I may, Chairman.
Of course you can.
When I first started 6 years ago, we were up in that 10% range. I think there were some years that even had maybe gone over that. So we're trending in the right direction. I bring that up as sort of that, cautionary,
But
focus to keep driving. I mean, I think the 8s, just personally, the 8s is a good range. I mean, and to your point, you get, by default, you get 100,000 right off the bat, every million, thrown back in that you can spend. So it helps, actually, in a sense, in the bigger picture every time we do that.
yeah, I think, if I might,
Yeah,
I
please.
think your point again is well taken. I think what drove the budget or the debt service up into the 10% range was the amount of building and school projects we were doing. It wasn't DPW vehicles or, paving or that type of thing that we were doing. It's definitely the larger projects. As we're doing fewer and fewer of those, that's what lets us get the number down.
Yeah.
Mr. Matola.
I know you've talked about this over there. So if we did everything, for example, in 2017, 2018, that's on, let's just say, the town side, when does it kick in from a debt service payment standpoint? Is it the next fiscal year? Is it 2 years later? Or for the purposes of this document, I'm looking at Exhibit 6, is it 2017, 2018?
If the top section, which maybe should have gone through, but I'm
Bob,
thinking
what
most
exhibit are
people
you on?
Are familiar with this. The top section,
What exhibit are you on, Bob?
Exhibit 4. The top section is the year of approval. Okay, so, for example,
2017, 2018, let's say the town wants to do this, that's
so 2017, 2018, so the
18
top
million.
section says that we're going to approve that $17 million
Right.
worth of projects. And then the bottom section would be what is done in that fiscal year. So just to pick one that's, well, like, for example, Penfield.
Okay.
Penfield says it's going to be, well, actually, Penfield's going to be approved hopefully before 17, 18, but we're looking at building it in 17, 18. But a lot of the projects are multi-year funding, multi-year spending, I mean.
Okay.
Okay, you see that much on the bigger projects, the school projects, you see that even more. On this, for example, the phone system is approved, I think, in fiscal year 16, 17. But then phase 1 is in 16, 17, and phase 2 in 17, 18. So so that the bonding is anticipated to be in the year of expenditure.
Okay. Thanks.
But it would actually probably be in the year after that,
After it's approved,
after it's spent.
after it's spent, the
After it's
next
spent,
year.
in the next July, it would be, and then the following year would be the first payment.
Can I, may I
Yeah.
follow up?
First principal payment.
I agree with what you said. I would have agreed with what you said 10 minutes ago, before you said that this model says the first 2 year, we don't pay anything in the waterfall. So the answer really is
No, what I'm saying is.
3 years.
No, no,
Oh, it's
no.
when's it bonded?
No, it's when it, we pay, let's say we spend money on the pavilion in 17, 18. That
Right.
means we will bond it in July of 18.
Yep, I'm with you.
And then we'll pay interest that year and then pay the first principal payment the following July.
Okay, but the schedule of payments that Mr. DeWitt was referring to
Thank
is
you.
for non-recurring and bands.
Oh, non-recurring bands.
Right,
those
which
are
is what I
zero.
thought Mr. Mottola
Right.
was talking about.
But when you talk a bigger project like Penfield or a school, that's a bond. It's not necessarily being banned along the schedule that you
Bands
just
for the
referred
smaller
to.
stuff, the non-recurring.
Bands are for less than $1 million.
That might not be a
No,
good example,
bands,
but
no, like we did, no, bands are for everything.
Okay.
All right, because you're going to ban stuff in
We
between the
we
bonds.
ban
Okay.
stuff and then we bond
And we
it later.
bond them, yeah.
Okay.
But we pay them off,
Right, pay them off every year.
right?
That's to take advantage of band rates versus bonding rates.
Back to Exhibit 3. Are there any questions on Exhibit 3? We'll go to Mr. Bateson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick follow-up, Bob. In looking at Exhibit 3, it just looks like you revisit everything that we had on the plan last year, tweak it for price adjustments or appropriation adjustments. The only thing I'm seeing here is a couple of new bridges, South Benson, and the removal of the IT. But the removal of the IT, you qualified in the beginning of the meeting by saying it's not going away, we just don't know?
I don't have enough information to even put a number on it right now.
Okay, so essentially, all this Schedule 3, the only changes I'm seeing are adjustments to that in bridges in South Benson.
Bridges, South Benson, the
Radio.
the radio, well, that's not new either, that's an
Yeah,
increase of
that's
$2
a
million.
revision of
Yeah.
price.
Right, so, you got the WPCA, stuff that we did, and what I just read, the beach, flood control stuff.
So if I look at this, from 12 months, these are the only needs that have been identified over the course of 12 months.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
And then that's why I'm saying, Ed, that next year I'm going to break this in half, stuff.
Right, but I assume there's some sort of, like, going back to questions that were asked and answered earlier, that there's a process whereby department heads come in, and after it made it through your review, this is what you came up with, and these are the several things that made the cut.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on Exhibit 3 for now?
Yeah, I have a
Mr. Walsh?
Under 2017-18, the Penfield Pavilion, is that your note where it says increase of $1,328,709 from fiscal year 14-15,
Last year it was in there 4.7.
4.7, but it was in the same year? Was it in
No, I think it's in a
2017,
diff-
2018?
I don't have last year's in front of me. I wouldn't think so, but I don't have it in front of me.
I presumed it would have been earlier.
I would think so.
Okay, so it just increased based on the town approval process,
Right.
and then it moved a
Yeah,
year or
she-
two
She might have just put it.
later?
She's got the new, where's the 1.3, where's the 1.3, actually? It should
If you
be,
look under the note next to where it says,
I'm looking at 17, 18, we got the $6 million, which is new that year.
below that, it says Penfield Pavilion dash increase of $1,328,709 from fiscal year 14/15. So then the column,
I'm
it's under
sorry.
capital,
Where's- where you- where's he
6,028,709, which is what we approved.
Oh, the increase, right. It's an increase, right. The increase, I'm sorry, that's not on the right-hand side. There should be, okay, I got it. That was probably in this year, which, the year that's lopped off. It was probably in the year that was lopped off. The first year of this schedule is 15-16.
So you had that
So we had that in there in 14-15.
14, 15,
Right,
or a lower amount.
for a lower amount.
And, okay.
A lower amount of 1.3 million.
Yeah, less,
Yeah, so it's
Yes.
4.7.
correct.
Now, do you have it in 17, 18, because that's when you think the bond will be issued, or when the work is going to be done?
Here's what I think is going to happen. No. We're currently in the fiscal year 16.
Yes.
I am thinking that the work will be done in year 16, 17, actually, hopefully. Um, 16.
Which would
no,
imply
it's-
that's
no,
a-
no, 16, 17. This is 15, 16.
That would imply that's a year off.
So yeah, it implies it's a year off. Yeah, we will get, I'm going to say this with a high degree of certainty. We will get a PW from FEMA this month,
Mm-hmm.
all right? That PW will probably be in the range that I've suggested or guessed, might be a better word, about $6.5 million. If you've been following the Penfield Building Committee, okay, that PW will be for replacement. That will be, and that will be the FEMA's estimate of what it should cost us to replace what we built for $4.8 million, $4.7 million 4 years ago. If you've, the building committee have done two things. One, they've come up with a number for a rebuild, a replace of 11 million. And they've also come up with a strategy to reduce the scope by taking out the lockers, and for some reason that saves them $5 million. I don't understand it. Okay, so what will happen though is we'll get the number from FEMA. The building committee will tell us what they want to do, and then we will work with FEMA to try to have it still be categorized as a replacement with adjustment. So we'll still get a full 75% reimbursement for what we spend. They being FEMA, may decide to just make it a replacement, recategorize it as a replacement, which then we have to go through some long negotiations. If we go through that process and don't do anything until we're completed with FEMA, then this number would be this year would be the correct year. But if we just go ahead and build and make a decision what we want, then it would be a year earlier.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Which raises, I guess, a good,
And not necessarily, in other words, obviously we're guessing here with the timing to have these discussions, but nothing has been quick with FEMA.
in regards to that $6 million number for 17, 18, do you have any of the FEMA reimbursement numbers in here?
Yes.
Okay, just show me that so I can just follow along, because so the full 6 million is just not in here, because you have what we expect to get for reimbursement in here.
Yeah.
It's on the next page, isn't it?
No, it would be in the
Should
changes
should be on
page.
Exhibit 1,
The
right?
changes page.
Should be, well, it'll be in Exhibit 1, but it won't be called out on Exhibit 1. It'll be
It's gotta
lumped
be
in
in
with
the
other
changes page, too,
reimbursements.
Because it changed from
But
last.
here it should be called out, right?
I guess it should
Yeah,
be.
Chris, if you look, they have Penfield reimbursement decrease in 15-16 of 750. And then 18-19, right. Oh, no, yeah, FEMA new, 1,950,000.
Where's the rest of the reimbursement?
No, the FEMA, that's a call. Oh, that's reimbursement, sorry. It's just not accounted for.
And part of it's also in 15, or rather in 16-17.
Yeah, we're building, as you
Or
can,
rather,
if you look at
17,
the,
18.
we're building it in, for $6 million in the schedule in 17-18. We are, we will anticipate receiving the $725,000 community development block grants that year, and then the following year, the $1.9 million is shown there as a reimbursement.
Okay, I thought when we approved this, though, that the net out-of-pocket dollars to the town was going to look like $900,000.
If you look at, well,
I thought
actually,
the
it's
FEMA
probably not on the
reimbursement-
schedule. Well, actually, it is. If you look at 15-16,
Yep.
there's a $1.7 million reimbursement, Fairfield Pavilion,
Are you talking about Exhibit 3?
Exhibit 4.
Exhibit 4.
Exhibit 4, 15-16.
Is that the insurance?
Yes, sir. So you
Under
got 1.7
16.7.
there.
You got 1.75.
You got 2 million there, that's 3.7. You got the 700 CD3, that's 4.5. Subtract 4.5 from 6, you got $1.5 million.
$1.5 million.
Was the number supposed, I thought the number was supposed to be closer to 900,000.
The original, I mean, there's been so much that's changed, I don't remember what, but, yeah, the original, there was a number that was 943,000.
Yeah, okay.
So right now, I mean, let's get into it a little bit since we're here, right? Penfield. At this point, we're not sure what the go-forward plan is, right? Because the committee has gotten estimates that are much larger than they thought. So, and
Yeah.
if you talk to them, more information that's come to light as regards FEMA. So now they're, basically, it's like Groundhog Day, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Excellent. What I have not confirmed this totally with bond counsel, but what I have, my belief and my comments to the committee was that I felt that I feel the resolution to rebuild FEMA is pretty specific.
Rebuild Penfield.
I'm sorry, thank you, is very specific, actually, not pretty specific, but very specific. And should they choose, even if they stay within the $6 million, if they choose to do something different than build a full facility, that it has to go back through the town bodies.
Yeah, without, speaking for the building committee without them here is a little bit difficult, certainly, and dangerous in terms of not wanting to misrepresent where they are. But the simplest way I can think to say it is, A, they had a plan, it was approved, they did a detailed design, they went out to bid, they actually went out to bid twice to get some better bids. That is still over the $6 million number. We passed
By
the-
about 800,000.
we passed the 50% rule, which allows the building committee to have the choice of demolishing it and rebuilding it new. Right. The initial estimates for that were even higher than the renovation bids. At this point, they are seriously evaluating, sticking with the $6 million number as a commitment and coming back with something that they can build for $6 million or less. When they make that decision, they'll have to get detailed numbers on that, but pretty much whatever path they go on from here, either because they've changed the approach that they're using, and it's spelled out pretty specifically, as Bob mentioned, in the bond resolution. So at this point, it's a reasonable expectation. If they did nothing else, they'd have to come back through the boards to change the bond resolution. Obviously, if they needed more money, they'd have to come back through the boards to get additional money.
And once we get the one amendment, not amendment, one addition to that, once we get the PW, while the building committee is going through their discussions and while this is going through the boards, myself and Bill Riley with WIT will be having discussions with FEMA to say, okay, what if we do this? What if we do this? But as I've pointed out in the past, those discussions could not be held until they've actually finished their work.
Mr. Walsh, and then I'll go to Mr. DeWitt.
Mr. Tetra, I just want to clear, do you agree that if they change the scope like they're talking about, that it has to come before the town bodies?
Yeah, from two perspectives.
Yeah.
One, my read of the bond
That's my read,
resolution
too, I
is it's
think.
pretty doggone specific.
Yes.
So if they decided to do nothing else,
Mhm.
if they could magically just say, let's not do the locker wing like we talked about, and we can get it done for under $6 million, which
Yes.
we don't know yet.
Yeah.
The bond resolution says rebuild the east wing, which is the locker wing. So I don't see how they not rebuild that because of how specific it is. If it were less specific, like build the Penfield Pavilion that might include the following, then maybe they would be at their discretion whether they did that or not. At this point, I don't see how they don't. At a second level, I think their intent is, and again, I hesitate to speak for another commission, but I believe their intent is for any significant change to come back through the boards to make sure everybody's on the same page. And all my conversations with them have tended to go around that. And Mr. Flynn, I know you've had some conversations. I think yours have probably came to the same approach.
Correct.
No, I'm happy to hear you say that, and I agree with the way the bond resolution, I thought we were very specific on how that was written.
Were.
But there was a representation 2 meetings ago. You weren't at that meeting, but Mr. Mayor was at that meeting.
Yes,
And
sir.
we've spoken about it, where there was a representation that you had been at a previous meeting before that and had told them that as long as they were within the $6,028,000 number, that they could reduce the scope and not have to come back to the town bodies. And that representation concerned me, but I just, that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, specifically, that's why you go back and check things like read the bond resolution.
Sure.
I was looking at this more of a school project where
Okay.
within the building you
Yep.
could. I did not remember, I remembered the bond resolution being specific, but not that specific.
Yep.
And I believe it was Mr. Bolito,
Yes.
one of the alums of this illustrious body,
Uh-huh.
that asked for the bond resolution and read the specific word and pointed out that it was way too specific not to bring it back through the bodies.
Yes.
It was always, I think, the intent of any significant change to come back through the bodies, but it's both a legal requirement, I believe now, as well as the intent of the building committee to bring it back through the bodies.
Great. I'm happy to hear that. Thank you.
Mr. DeWitt, you had one, and then I'm going to Mr. Brown.
Yep. Not on Penfield, so if anybody wants to talk Penfield.
Oh,
yeah,
we're
go
still
ahead.
on Penfield. Let's
Yeah,
go to
you
Mr.
finish
Brown.
Penfield. I'm actually
Then we'll go to Mr. Becker.
Just a
Assuming
quick
it's Penfield.
follow-up. Did you happen to bring that before bond council? Or do you think it's necessary to bring it before bond council?
I think Mr. Mayor referenced he was checking with bond council on that, but the wording looks,
I'm very confident.
I agree with all that. I'm just wondering if they took a look at it and
I think-
verified.
If anybody raised the issue, we would certainly call them up and spend the money, but
I think the
I'm fairly
issues,
confident in our position.
I think there are
Very confident.
two components of this, and it's been an ongoing discussion with the building committee. One is there's a legal requirement as to what you have to do, given exactly what the bonds, and to Mr. Walsh's point. But the second is just what was the intent of the bodies and what are we doing? And I think the building committee has gone above and beyond in making sure that they have had transparency and full disclosure in what they're doing. And our conversations all along have said if there was a significant change or requirement, that we'd bring it back through the bodies. A lot of that centered around initially, what if we couldn't hit the 1.5 million or 1 to 1.5 million, as I remember it, of town contribution? What if the town contribution kicked up to 3 million because and in that discussion, we always talked about bringing it back to the bodies, even though technically that wouldn't be required at all. but the idea was to bring it back if the town share got significantly more than what was the ballpark of what we're looking for, if that helps.
Mr. Brown, anything else? We'll go to Mr. Becker on this item.
And I don't want to dive too deep into Penfield. Obviously, it's its own issue, and it seems as though it may at some point come before us. But in the face of the delays and the timing, and as particularly, I believe, when it came to us, one of the concerns being the longer that it sits, the more it may end up costing us, or, I mean, there's a number of different elements to it. But as I look at this and what I'm hearing in regards to an adjusted building that perhaps doesn't have lockers, which is a big revenue reasoning in a sense for why we adjusted that here, or kicked it back to the BOS to come back with the lockers, but also if there's a risk that it no longer passes the 50% and we end up losing some revenue there, it almost seems, why are they not maybe working in a two-track? Perhaps coming back to the boards, finding out, hey, will they pay for the 800, which when it is all finalized may not even hit there, and if not, then we're prepping to come back. You know, we've got a whole nother track, and we'll see them in 2 months with the reduced option. They could be on the agenda now asking for 800 and the building as it was before, just like every other project where the bids come in off saying the bids came in off, the estimator was off by whatever percentage. So, you know, I hope maybe the message can be conveyed to them that that's something that they should consider. Because I think all we're going to do is, you know, it's going to be months from now, and we're just going to keep getting ourselves in a worse and worse position when the boards very well may approve the 800. We don't know, and you know, we have past practice in a sense with many projects to at least go to the boards and ask them. And I know
One,
you
I
don't wanna
can't speak
on
for the building
committee,
committees and wouldn't
but-
try.
but,
Two,
you
I
know.
think it would be great if you attended one and caught up on all the discussion and caught the other parts of this. Three, I don't know if we can get to that answer tonight, but
I've been to some, and I've also watched some on TV. I think that one of the, while there is some openness to some comments, one of my frustrations always at other boards or committees, it's just a reality, but unlike the Board of Selectmen, we are only ex officio to the RTM. We don't have the latitude to really dive in deeply. We can pass comments out and whatnot, but I am here where we're talking about capital, where we are the Board of Finance, and I'm certainly saying it loud and clear. And I know you know, some others seem to be paying attention or nodding their heads, so maybe that's a, you know, something that should be sent to them, because I think it's worth exploring it for the sake of finally getting this project done. So, I mean, please pass that along, at least from me, so I don't want to dominate too much on Penfield, so that's it, but
Yeah.
thank you.
Mr. Bateson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Bob, I've several times in this conversation, I've heard referred to 1.5 cost to the taxpayer. I don't want to put words in Mr. Walsh's mouth, but I remember 900,000 as well. Could you forward me the document where it's 1.5? Because
I confirmed it was 943,000.
wait,
Yeah.
I just heard Mike say 1.5.
No,
Yeah.
what we said, I mean, I was totally listening to every word there. The document that was approved, that went through with all the assumptions that were in that document, was 943,000. The quick and dirty we just did on this piece of paper shows a $6 million project with 725,000 reimbursement, 2 million reimbursement,
4.5 total.
a total of 4.5, which gives us a 1.5. None of these numbers are exacting. This is just, and they will not be exacting, as I've been saying over and over again, until such time as we finally get the PW from FEMA and we can sit down and actually know what direction we're headed.
Okay, so we're still sticking to the fact that it's 900,000 cost to the taxpayer? The hope. Sorry, did I say fact? Hope.
That is still that's still within the realm of possibility.
And just to clarify, I will defer to Mr. Mayor, but my memory was 1 to 1.5, but I wouldn't argue with his memory of the numbers.
Yeah, no, there were different scenarios with different ranges, but there was definitely a 943,000.
Yeah, I remember at the last minute, the RTM, it was FEMA alt, this, that, the
Right,
other thing.
right.
Somebody showed, I mean,
Yeah.
I went into that evening thinking
Right.
it was $950,000.
Yeah, that's, no, you're right. I'm not disagreeing.
Yeah. Ed, I'm not arguing, I'm just, my memory was just different, but I will defer to Mr. Mayor on the numbers.
Are you good, Mr. Bateson?
As long as it's 950, yeah.
All right, any other questions, comments on this?
Everybody will have an opportunity to discuss this again.
It certainly sounds that way. Let's take a 5-minute recess and then come back. We'll finish up the town side. I'll go to Mr. DeWitt with a question that he's been holding on to patiently.
Call
Thank
the
you.
meeting back
And then we'll go right to
into
the board
session.
and get this
And we're going to start with
moving
Mr.
along.
DeWitt,
Thank
who had a
you.
question, please. Mr. DeWitt, go right ahead.
First thing I want to say is, again, congratulations to the Finance Department, because obviously all these detailed and wonderful discussions are happening because of this document, so thank you very much. Exhibit 3. When the reimbursements are in the brackets, that means that money that we had, so the first 2 lines, streetscape pedestrian improvements. We had expected to receive a reimbursement for $800,000. That did not happen. Is that correct? The very, very first line in 2015, 2016.
I'm sorry. What that simply says is that the streetscape pedestrian improvements costs have been reduced. The estimated cost of that project is $800,000 less in that year than was in last year's plan. And that could be one of two, there could be one of two reasons for that. One, the project has, the actual cost of the project, estimated cost of the project is less,
Mhm.
or it could be that it got moved to a different year.
Okay. When I was listening to the Penfield discussion, that when I saw it under reimbursements, it felt like to me the first 2 lines.
Okay, excuse me, that's reimbursements, right. The reimbursement, so yeah, so the reimbursement would be less because the project cost less, the expenditure was less.
And/or the project moved to a different year.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that we had expected a grant or some other reimbursement for $800,000 that just didn't come through.
No.
So this isn't lost money, is what I guess I'm getting at.
A reimbursement decrease would be, there's no changes in reimbursement expectations from last year, of anything that was in last year's, with the exception of Penfield, which moves around.
So the Penfield 700, so we expected a reimbursement of $750,000 this year, not going to happen because of the timing.
Correct.
It's going to be reflected somehow in that $1.9 million reimbursement in
Right.
2018.
Yeah, or the 725,000.
Got it,
down in
okay.
18.
It just, again, I was
Yeah.
thinking it was lost money, but I appreciate the,
Yeah, that's why I said next year I'm going to make this different. I'm going to do changes on one schedule and new on another.
yeah.
I think that'd be it.
And then just one comment about the whole, the 6, whatever that number was before, the 6 million, Penfield turned into 6 million.
Last year was on last year at 4.7
Yep,
million.
so let's call it 4.7 for lack of a better number. I'm thinking, when we sat here last year and did this, that I don't think anybody thought we were executing in 14 and 15, so I would have thought this movement would have been made to 15, 16. But beside the point, I understand your explanation was I understood your explanation of why 6 million is now in 17, 18. But I guess, and again, up to discussion, I would have moved it to 16, 17. I think it's better to put it in earlier than later, because a sooner expense is worse than a further out expense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for planning, just a, thought,
Yeah.
probably would have been, I think, better in an earlier year than a later year for overall planning purposes.
Yeah, yes, I don't disagree.
And that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go to Exhibit 4 then. Anything on Exhibit 4? We kind of went through this a little bit as to what it was. Go ahead,
Just
Mr.
to-
Walsh.
Like, we can ask Board of Education questions and things like that?
We can. I was going to go on to the
Okay.
Board of Ed right after, but we
That's,
can go on.
I can wait.
Okay, let's go on. Let's just finish this, and then we'll go to the Board of Ed.
Yeah.
If we can.
Just a real quick one.
Okay.
2015, 2016. Clubhouse design for 300,000, WPCA facilities plan for 750. Not proposed, but not approved. The WPCA I get. Where is the clubhouse design? And what's the chance of it actually executing in this fiscal year we're currently in? Have we talked about that?
No, what that means is that it is the intent of the Parks and Recreation Committee to come before a town body this fiscal year and for $300,000 to spend in this fiscal year for the design of the clubhouse, which they want to do in the next fiscal year.
So wouldn't that mean that that number should be in the 16, 17 budget?
That would be, this would be what, they're going to come and ask for it this year. They're going to ask you for that $300,000 this year.
We're going to bond it this year then?
No, they're going to ask you for it this year.
So, okay, so Exhibit 4 is when it was asked for, not approved?
The top part of Exhibit 4 is the approval, the year of request and hopeful approval. The
Oh,
bottom part is
understood.
the year of expenditure.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on Exhibit 4? Seeing none, we'll go to Exhibit 5, which is the standard waterfall model, which shows our expense year after year, well over to the right-hand side.
Yeah, you can see those annual changes. That's what we're trying to get rid of. That's what I'm,
That's what we're trying to more
yeah.
smooth.
Right.
Does anybody have any questions on this? This is driven by the other schedules and assumptions. Mr. Gerber. Mr. Bateson, can you pass? Thanks.
Just real simple. Can you just remind us where the interest rates come from? The bonding rates?
Discussions.
The
Fair to say they're guesstimates, Mr. Mayor?
are,
Yeah. I mean, I sit
they're just
I sit
placeholders.
around with people that, work in the financial markets and with our financial advisor, and we all kind of ruminate and come to a number.
So these are 20-year rates in 2024, right? Would be 4%? Is that what this is saying?
That is correct for municipality. That is the best estimate of the people that I speak with.
Okay. All right.
Any other
thanks.
questions? All right. With that, can I, number 6, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any questions or comments on number 6, which is a derivative of the rest of them? Go ahead, Mr. Gerber.
Yeah, just a quick question. For AAA rating, do you have a target for the percentage on the right?
Oh, yeah, less than 10 is fine. Less than 10 is considered very good by the rating agencies.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on this? Mr. Becker.
Thank you. More in general on the town side, I think as you're about to move over
We
to
are.
the Board of Ed. But the Board of Ed has been publishing this, facilities plan document that we keep getting. And I want to say I brought it up last year or at other meetings, but at one point, it wasn't quite in the same format, but we had received a similar sort of chart and some backup documents, I believe prepared by PPW, so it may not have included everything. But I thought we were trending towards something like this on the town side, that I mean, if you take these as an example, each year I take them, I put them aside, it's a document to go back and very clearly reference to as things ebb and flow. Is there some, sort of plan or, to do something like that? Is there a way that they can trend there? I know it's a lot of manpower, hours, but I would think they have some of this internal, because I think it would be very helpful, not just for us here, but all the boards, and sort of on a rolling basis, as the Board of Education document is very helpful.
Yes, I think that we have done similar things in the past, not as colorful as the Board of Ed document.
Black and white's okay.
I think we just didn't get to it this year. We typically do prepare it as part of the non-recurring proposals that we put together, and we certainly can arrange to do it sooner than that.
Yeah, no, and theirs obviously kind of goes for a much broader, discussion, and that's sort of, I think, where I'm trending on that. It's not just that, we've certainly improved, the town side is I would say mirroring on the non-recurring at this point, and what they bring forward, the same, if not better at times. They both do, very good work. So it's more this sort of a document and broad that I think would be helpful.
Yeah, I have a comment to make on that, with not wanting to totally say something different, but a little bit anyway. There's a lot of projects here, and to develop a 14, we have, whenever a project comes before the town bodies for approval, there's the 14-step document. 14-point document that is produced. I am certainly not going to commit, and that would require DPW to be doing a lot of work. These are early stage projects. A lot of work would need to be done to produce the kind of exactitude that the Board of Ed puts into their projects, because the Board of Ed is basically, they do a lot of work on all those projects. They have the schools, they got the principals. That would be a great, manpower effort at a very early stage of a project, and I'm not sure it would be really valuable. Personal opinion.
Yeah,
I
and
think that the challenge is, as Bob pointed out, that a lot of the town side are smaller dollar amount projects. So I think there's a trade-off. At some point, there's a cutoff in doing that, but I think for the larger projects, we can certainly take a look at that, to your point.
Yeah, and I'm not saying to, entirely mirror, because I know that there's a lot of work, and on a staff perspective, that could be burdensome. So I'm bringing up kind of my thoughts there and pass them on to administration. So I think that's all I have, really, I think, at this time on the town side, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. We're going to go, if that's all, we'll go over to the Board of Ed side. Thank you, gentlemen, for your patience. Thank you for being here. We did get your facilities plan and have had a copy of that. I'm assuming that has not been updated at this point. I mean, it's been approved in June. Have these schedules been updated at all, or have these been, do you guys want to speak to this a little bit? Go ahead, Dr. Teitel, I'll go over to you briefly.
Yeah, the waterfall.
Can I, before we go, I want to, and my apologies for interrupting, I want to thank all the department heads that came tonight. We appreciate it. We appreciate your time and your attention and your input into the document, so thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Teitel.
So the Board of Education approved this facilities plan June 23rd. This what we call waterfall, it's different use of the term. This document matches this. Hasn't been any change in either of these documents since June 23rd, but these match.
Since when?
June 23rd.
Okay, thanks.
Of 2015. Was that the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? We've had opportunity to see the document, opportunity to see the plan. We'll go to Mr. Brown first and then go to Mr. Walsh.
Thank you. Just a question, two major projects that look like are coming up are Holland Hill and then Mill Hill. And you have estimate of 9 million, right, 9.1 million, and then is it 13? And you have this methodology, right? 15 points on how to get a cost estimate and how you do it. But how comfortable are you with these estimates? Because in the past, there have been unforeseen issues that have come up that have driven the cost of these projects up. And has everything been taken into consideration to when you determine these costs? PCBs, whatever's come to us in the past.
I know.
Is that a nice way of saying we've missed by a howitzer on a bunch of projects?
Right. Well, the PCBs have been the wild card on a bunch of projects. And, when you get into the schools and you start doing the real formal testing that's required, you can run into those things. And there's no way to really know that. I will say that one of the steps the board took in the right after the Osborne Hill discovery that's kicked all this off, which is now 3 years ago. Board hired a firm out of Boston, very well-regarded firm, to do some preliminary sort of chlorine screening, rough screening on the schools to see what indications, what was out there, and what could we do about it right away. And so we do have that information that we didn't have before. And that's one of the reasons that the Mill Hill project is actually more in terms of dollars than the Holland Hill project, because we expect, based on the chlorine scan, that Mill Hill is going to cost more for hazardous materials than Holland Hill. But now that these testing requirements are in place and you have to remediate basically right away, you're absolutely right. You really don't know until you really get into it, and that's burned us on several projects that have driven these things up. But we did at least have a little more information about estimating these because we had done that work, and that purpose of that was not just to get estimates, but also we took action that they recommended to encase and make sure the schools were all safe in the meantime. Tom, do you want to add anything to that, or is that about it? Yeah, I think that was. So I think you'll see in the project detail, there's more for hazardous material removal at Mill Hill. And clearly our biggest challenge in putting this together and to try to help with the town with the smoothing was to how to manage what are really the last two remaining big projects. If you look at sort of the big numbers that are out there going forward, rounding off, these are basically into the foreseeable future, the last two that are in the $9+ million range. Everything else is relatively small compared to this. And so we spread them out a bit to manage the cash flow. And that's what we tried to do, looking at the total cash flow at the bottom of ours. But it does drop down after the completion of the Mill Hill project, because the next biggest project that's on here is Sherman, and that's FEMA limited. So that can only go up to a certain amount. And then there's no other really big elementary school, middle school, or high school project in this plan. And so our cash flow, our bonding requirements are projected to drop off fairly significantly. So that's how we tried to spread it out. We've always been open to moving them around, depending on what else comes up. We seem to get a lot of surprises.
Right. And so that's all been considered. I hear you say you get a consultant or someone that
yes, we
pulls and lets you know what they think may come up has in the past been unexpected?
We got one of the premier environmental consultants on PCBs in New England, at least, out of Boston area.
Woodard and Curran.
Woodard and Curran, you might remember that because they did a report, which I think you all probably got a copy of, because I remember some of our earlier discussions of the after the discovery at Osborne, where people were asking us questions, asking the board, asking maybe all of us, well, how do we know, what's the risk in the other schools? And there's no requirement to test. We wanted to make sure that if there were some issues out there,
that we took care of them immediately. And so we commissioned Woodard and Curran to do a report, and then it took us about 2 years to complete all of their recommendations, where they could say, everything is fine until you do a building project, and then you'll get back into it. So some schools, there was nothing because they weren't built later, a Burr wouldn't have it. But other schools had it, and based on their observations, they went around to every single school, looked at the windows and the whole 9 yards, so that we could say to the public, we've had an expert view of this. They recommended these 20 actions, and we completed those 20 actions. And now as the projects come up, you're going to hit stuff. I mean, just a mini example is that the Jennings boilers, which you guys approved last year. Now, they're under budget. Actually, all of our projects are under budget, all of our capital non-recurring. The Jennings boilers, unbeknownst to anybody, when they went in to take the boilers out, they found some asbestos. No one had any idea that was there. And we had like a program running in the summer in that school. So we had to move that program for a couple weeks, go in, abate it, and do it. It's a mini version of it, but you just never know with these things. So we're as comfortable as we can be, but our experience has been so volatile. I'm not going to swear on the Bible that these things aren't going to go above this number.
Go to Mr. Walsh.
Yeah.
Dr. Tuttle, Mr. Dwyer, getting back to following up on when Mr. Brown was discussing those two large capital projects at Holland Hill and then Mill Hill. The delta between those seems to be large, and I understood what you said about environmental, but when I look at those environmental numbers under soft costs, the hazardous material allowance, it doesn't seem to be that dramatically off. I mean, Holland Hill is $1,022,000. Mill Hill is $1,196,000. The big delta seems to be in the new classroom additions, where it's about $3 million more. And when I look at the needs earlier in the report, it's like 7 classrooms versus 8 classrooms. Everything else seems to be, making the core facilities larger. So why is it go from 7 classrooms at Holland Hill addition and 8 classrooms at Mill Hill, but yet there's a $3 million swing in the cost of new classrooms?
It's a more difficult site, Mill Hill is.
It's almost double the cost.
Yep, Mill Hill, if you recognize the back portion, there's a steep hill.
Hill down there.
There's a lot of ledge on that site. We've done some test pits in the area when we did the new playground versus Holland Hill, which is more level, has more room, and doesn't have the ledge.
So really, it's not the hazardous material issue that's really driving the cost.
The allowance,
that's only a couple $100,000.
Yeah, the allowances we held for the PCB abatement and hazardous material is similar, but that's just an allowance. But we do have a report from Woodard and Curran that Mill Hill came up with more chlorine scanning. What they do is PCB has a very high content of chlorine in it. So they came up with a gun that they purchased that can scan building materials, floors, ceilings, walls, and check for chlorine. And they got more chlorine scans in Mill Hill for surface area than they did at Holland Hill. But all we did was put an allowance in. We still don't know that it's there until we test. And also until a building committee looks at that school building and says, this is the area we're going to put the addition renovation on, it's going to really disrupt 90% of the school, or this is the area we're going to put the addition renovation on, it's only going to, affect 10% of the school. But more than anything, Mill Hill is a more difficult site to do an addition renovation.
Okay. It would seem to me that, I mean, I'm not a building expert by any means, but if you have ledge over there, can't you build on top of the, can't you put pilings on top of the ledge?
You have to look at,
It's sloping down, so you're going to need to have it be equal as it goes down, correct?
Yep, but
So
you
why
also
couldn't
have to test the ledge. You'll have to hire a consultant, environmental consultant, to see if it's breakable with a excavator, or is it too hard and have to be blasted, Or is it too much surface area? Do you want to pin the foundation to it? You know, an environmental consultant would have to look at that with the building committee, but generally in talking with DPW on that site and the architectural people we talked with, it's definitely a more difficult site, has more ledge, surface ledge, for where the addition renovation has to happen
Okay.
versus Holland Hill.
Based on when that's happening, are you still expecting large underutilization of Dwight at that point in time?
Well, we're projecting Dwight to be about the same number of students going forward. Actually, we saw a little bit of an unexpected bump this year in the Dwight enrollment. They went back up over 300 K to 5.
Is the school underutilized?
It's somewhat underutilized. The interesting thing at Dwight, I think, is actually Dwight is the closest thing we have to the proper utilization. It's that the other ones are overutilized. So we do have one of our preschools at Dwight that does take up a classroom. But there are very few empty rooms there. That's actually the way a school probably should be sized relative to the population. It's just that people are so used to the cramming and jamming that have gone on in a lot of our buildings. So there we don't have to educate kids in the hallway, and people have private spaces for things they need to have, and so on and so forth. That more represents closer to what we really need. I will say that the board, in reviewing this, the original plan before this was building out Mill Hill out to a 504 school, so-called 504, 504 student capacity. And based on the enrollment projections, the board scaled both the Mill Hill and the Holland Hill projects back so that they are now less costly than the plan that you looked at a year ago. So we did adjust for enrollment. The other thing is that the board has set up an ad hoc committee about redistricting. I don't know if that's going to lead to anything, but certainly to look at the possibility of were there a redistricting option that would lower the need to build classrooms at both Holland Hill and Mill Hill, if that were possible, and what would that save? So that's still in the works. We're going to be getting on that work. I don't know, Phil, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, a redistricting committee has been established, had held its first meeting, and that's exactly what they're looking at, is whether that is a methodology of, it won't do anything around the core upgrades that may have to happen programmatically or because of code issues, but in terms of the need to build additional classrooms to serve the population that is projected in that particular neighborhood, it may help us save those classrooms. It's about a $500,000, give or take, per classroom to build a classroom. So if you can save 3 or 4 classrooms, then you've saved that amount of money. Of course, every time you talk about redistricting, that changes the nature of a family's neighborhood school concept. So it's kind of sometimes the third rail in discussions. But the goal is to have that committee's work done by next March, so that as we look to either Holland Hill and/or Mill Hill, whether that is a solution or not, that might further reduce. It's not going to change the need for Holland Hill to get a substantial upgrade, because there are core facilities work that needs to happen, deficiencies work that needs to happen. But it may further reduce the total of that cost.
Mr. Cullen, have you looked at other ways that would be less costly to put the same number of classrooms at Mill Hill? Like maybe not going down that hill, or somehow reconfiguring the school and the layout of that school? Or is it just,
Yeah,
is that site just too tight?
No, we did look at that, but it is a tight site.
Yeah.
There's not much you can do out the side towards the neighbor. The front's pretty much existing. Architects have looked at that. We haven't looked at the annex building type design. We figure that the building committee will do that when they get their charge, but that's a tough site for that also. That's still got a foundation, pier foundation system. The way the site's set up, just like the portables have been put, they've been put on the pavement in the back in a long line because no one wants to go down the hill, disrupt the hill and the ledge and go into the playground area. But a building committee, when they look at that, will hopefully get a good professional design team in. And I believe they're going to have to go down the hill a little bit with an addition.
You can't go up because it would close the school.
Right,
Okay.
right.
This is, depending on how we move these projects through the system, there would be much more detailed work on these costs and the scope and what's possible and not before it ever gets to the town bodies.
Sure.
So that goes without saying. Whether that's done by the building committee under the old model with the seed money and then a building committee coming in, or whether we do that up front and then the amount gets appropriated, there'd be a lot, we would get this at least to the conceptual design level before it went in for funding, and then a lot of those options will be examined by an architect in detail.
My other question is regards to the Sherman Phase 3, 2020-21. Is that far out because of the FEMA regulations?
No, that's
You
just spread out the cash flow. That's just
You
other
trying to fit
projects.
projects in it and prioritizing those projects?
Yeah, it's FEMA. We're past the FEMA line now with that with that school, but we also have, looking at. We know that we're coming back, or the building committee is going to be coming back to the town bodies this year for, once they get a price and EPA approval on those abatement and windows at Ludlow High. We know that money is still lurking. We also know we have to replace the roof or part of the roof at Fairfield Woods Middle School. And that's about a $3 million number. That's in the waterfall here.
Came up quicker than we expected.
Yeah.
What happened there?
The warranty expires actually in 2015. With our PM program, we've been getting almost 5 years longer on these roofs, but Woods is not. It's failing faster than we expected, and our contractor and consultant's been on it on a regular basis and just said it's going too fast. So we had to move that up.
We're obviously always interested in advancing projects forward if people are interested in seeing things done faster. But when we put this together and brought it to the board, we tried to spread this so that we could avoid, to the extent we could do it, avoid the big bounces. But obviously, if we get a signal that people are interested in doing things faster, we're happy to comply with that.
Like if you had a check to that.
Right, that's right. Right.
I'm going to go to Mrs. Marmee. She was, then I'll go to Mr. Bateson.
Thank you. You answered part of my question. I've heard from quite a few Holland Hill parents that they're concerned art on a cart and music in the hallway, and really that there's a lot of crowding. And so I was going to ask the question about, I knew that there was a redistricting committee looking into perhaps alleviating some of that crowding situation in several schools, and but it's now my understanding that regardless of what the redistricting committee decides, if they say this is a good idea that we redistrict and then we wouldn't have to do the major construction, you still have to spend the money for some core facilities work. So
that's correct.
I'm clear on that now. I guess you had mentioned that the redistricting committee might make a decision by next March. Is that this March of this year or a year from March?
Let me clarify. The redistricting committee's charge is to present a series of options on how redistricting might occur to make more efficient use of school buildings. They won't make the decision. They will present options to the full board, and the full board will get that report by March is what our deadline is, and then the board will review it and then choose which option might make sense, if any of them make sense.
So again, it's March
It's March of
2016.
16,
And
yeah.
from a timing standpoint, because again, there is a sense of immediacy with some of the crowding and what's going on in the hallways and not in the classroom, does that work in terms of timing? Does that give the board enough time to kind of look at planning for what needs to happen?
The March date was chosen because of because of the schedule that is approved in this booklet. So yes, it works.
So we don't want to get people's hopes up here, but because even if in the most optimistic scenario, from final project vote from, say, the RTM to completion of a project is multiple years. So we are going to be struggling at that site, either way for a little while. Yeah, we've lost some classroom space over there. It's one of our growing schools, and it's also, and I think Mill Hill and Holland Hill are really sort of equal in this regard. Both have probably the most substandard core facilities in the district. So and I should also layer on top of this, any redistricting plan involving, say, Holland Hill in particular, has to be mindful of the fact that we cannot create or make worse a racial imbalance issue that we're under from the state. Currently, we're under a mandate from the state to remedy a racial imbalance problem at McKinley. And for that, there's many options, and it's very complicated, and I have engaged a consultant to help with that. But we have to be careful, and the board has to be careful in any redistricting scenario, that while it might potentially solve a space problem, say, at Holland Hill, depending on what happens and how that works, you could actually make worse the racial imbalance problem at McKinley, which we can't do. We're trying to solve that one as well. So the good news is we're able to use the same consultant to do the same legwork for both of these matters. But just want to lay that out there that, the closest skill to Holland Hill is McKinley. And that may not be the right way to do it.
I'm going to go to Mr. Bateson, who's been waiting, then I'll come back to Mr. Mottola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Dr. Tittle or Mr. Dwyer, I heard you state that when it comes to Holland Hill and Mill Hill, you revisited the 504 design capacity. What are you at now for those?
462 for Holland Hill and 441 for Mill Hill.
462 for Holland Hill and what for Mill Hill?
441.
It's actually written right in the, it's written right in the booklet. 441 at Mill Hill. It's on page 33 of the booklet. And Holland Hill is 462. That's on page 35 of the booklet.
And that's after the renovation?
That's correct.
Okay. By departing from the 504, can you quantify how much that's saving us?
Yeah, we actually did that calculation for the board, if you remember that. It was a couple $1 million.
Couple million each or a couple million in total out of the 20 million?
No, combined, it was the number? Yeah, 2,606,000.
Right.
2,606,000. And Riverfield that we're just about finished with, we went 504 on that?
Yes, that's 504.
Okay. I know you guys are the experts when it comes to this stuff. It's just, it's not often that we get the opportunity to have a bond appropriation before us, and it's, you guys get the chance to put a shovel in the ground. Riverfield, if I'm looking at the MGT numbers, they're in the high threes. Holland Hill is in the mid-fours. I would question when this appropriation comes before us, departing and decreasing, going from 504 to 462. I mean, I know it's only 40 kids, but that sounds like space. I don't want to... It concerns me that by saving $2.6 million, we're taking away some numbers for capacity. I don't know. Just a thought for you guys. I know that this is your baby, and I get it. It's just I know when this comes before me, that's what's going to be going through my head. It's just I thought 504 is where we want to be. And I know MGTs, these things aren't reliable, but I just finished Riverfield, and they're in the high 3s. I'm looking at Holland Hill, they're in the mid-4s. That causes me concern.
I think Mr. Bateson has had the argument within himself that our board has had, and we have 2 or 3 board members who don't look at that particular neighborhood, but they look at the total school system and say, look, we have extra seats over here, so why do we need to build seats in another neighborhood? And the board has that debate back and forth. There was somewhat of a compromise decision in the approval of this new plan that said we're not going to go the whole way of saying we're not going to build any more classrooms at Mill Hill or Holland Hill, but we'll shave it back a little bit as part of the debate that happens at any board table.
Okay, I understand the debate, and I understand what you guys do. It's just when we use these numbers like 462, 441, that I'm sure that affects the discussion on core facilities and whatnot.
No, you're right.
It just causes me concern that we're departing from 504, which is something that we've held for years.
Trying to be.
I don't want to spend more money either, guys, but
Right.
if we're going to do this, I really want to do it right.
No,
I was going to say, Mr. Bateson, you want
Yes.
to spend more money, take the money.
Right, okay. We'd be happy to build a 504 school in both locations if that's what the town wants to do.
I'll say that, that I would have preferred to stay with the 504, but other board members did not, and this is what resulted, and that's what happens at every board in this town, compromise to something.
And these 10-year projections change on a 2 to 3 year basis. And when Riverfield was, I don't know even when it was first approved, it's been kicking around for so long. At the ribbon cutting, someone said it was 10 years ago. So, projections for Riverfield at that time were to get up into the mid-4s, and who knows, it still may. So I think it's always prudent to have some headroom. You just never know. I mean, just this year, we were budgeting Dwight at a much lower number, and all of a sudden, we had to add 3 sections of kids up there. So you never know.
Mr. Walsh has a quick comment on top of Mr. Bateson, so go ahead.
This is just more of a kind of right on point to Mr. Bateson's question, which is, we give you facilities and you run your program out of it, correct? And it gets to a point where does the town make a decision, or is it the Board of Ed that leads, the tail wags the dog, of what facilities do we as a town want to build to give to them? Because under what Mr. Dwyer was just saying, his board is compromising and going back and saying, okay, for 462 or 441. But at a certain point, do we make a decision as a town that maybe we want to build 504s because that's the best model? And are we being dictated to by a board that is in the midst of a compromise between 9 members? And that's, I don't know, I think it's a discussion we should probably have, because if we go down this 441, but the rest of the town bodies are sitting here saying, we've been talked into a 504 model, we agree with the 504 model, we'd rather spend $2 million now than potentially down the road have to build further additions or further something else, or more portables. Maybe with state reimbursement, it's cheaper to actually build the 504 to have that extra capacity online. And are we going to be dictated to by a Board of Education when it's really our facilities as a town that we're supplying them?
If I might comment on if I might
Yeah.
comment. Our board is always cognizant of the struggles of the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the RTM ultimately to approve projects, because we all have scarce resources. So we're part of that team. And so it's not that we're dictating to the town that we want to do it differently. We're trying to acknowledge that there's not a bottomless pit to money. And so our preference probably would be the kind of the standard, but then we would end up with maybe a school that had 75 or 80% capacity and somebody will be at this table to defend us when we say, well, but that's what the town wanted us to do. So we can work with the bodies and say, what is the best long-term strategy? This is just a placeholder for where we are at the moment.
Mr. McKenna.
I was just going to say, it's always been 504. When I was on the Board of Ed, it was 504. That was the model, that was the plan, that was the goal. And you know what's going to happen. So you build one of these schools to 441, and 10 years from now, you'll be at 5-something, and you're going to have to put a portable there or something to that effect. I agree with Mr. Bateson and Mr. Walsh. It's somewhat short-sighted what your board decided there. So, and I do think it's a Board of Ed issue, but it's our issue too. So,
But we're,
thank you.
we're happy to bring forward a couple options too, and say, here's the delta and the costs. I mean, because there's points in between too. You know, doesn't have to be either or. We will be getting a further review of our 10-year enrollment projections as part of the work we're doing around the racial imbalance, so we might get some further work there. But I think the other part is the board is cognizant of looking at an enrollment projection, say for a place like Mill Hill, where you see the numbers as what they are, and then a body would say to us, well, you know, your 10-year enrollment projection is, you're only going to go to, say, 420. Why are you building it to 504? It's a legitimate question that I felt we needed to have an answer to. I think the Holland Hill is a tougher one, because that one clearly is much closer to the projected enrollment there, and that part of town seems to be growing in terms of student population. Holland Hill has exploded in terms of student body.
Based on, following up on Selectman Marmion's position in regards to Holland Hill, based on where you see this coming in, we should be expecting as town bodies to be seeing Holland Hill this coming year. Because
That's the way this is laid out,
You need
yes.
this approved in the next year to be able to build it the next year.
Yeah, so the way we lay it out, and I think we're always 1 year off from the town on this, is so when you look at our column on here, on this big sheet that says 16, 17.
Yes.
Okay, we bring that to you during 15, 16.
Yes.
Okay, so if you look, for example, at the 15, 16, which is the current year we're in, all those projects look familiar because you approved them last year. It's kind of like, we treat it like the budget.
Yeah.
And we're going to have access to the money during 16, 17, and with a large project like Holland Hill, to keep on the state reimbursement track, you need to have final body approval by the RTM by June 30th of any given year, or you wait a year for the legislature to maneuver. So right now, our schedule, as it's laid out now, is that, and one reason why Mr. Dwyer said we want the redistricting committee to kind of finish up its work in March, is that the plan would be to bring forward a proposal for Holland Hill so that all town bodies could approve it if they wanted to by June 30th, 2016. That's the current timeline.
Okay. And you understand between that April and June period, we have a budget process going on. So
Well, it tends to work out, the reason we put that in there is it actually works out so
However,
that,
worn down.
well, yeah, warring down is a good strategy, but in fact, it kind of hits the town bodies when they're sort of done with the budget, as it turns out.
Worn down, right.
Worn down. Well, or it could mean that you feel like you've tapped the well and there's nothing left for this, so it
There's a
can work
good
against you
strategy.
too.
Go with that one. Yeah,
Right?
there's a good
So, in fact, I believe we did one project where, the RTM got it in June, and that, that's post-budget, and, you're done really in early May usually with your work on the budget. So, we try to get it through, not at the same time as you're doing the operating budget, for sure.
Thank you. Can I get Mr. Tetros been patient, and I'm going to go to Mr. Becker.
Thank you. I think that a couple observations. One, I suspect that there's 168 other towns wishing to be in a situation where the Board of Ed wasn't asking for enough space, money, and building. But I think more to the point is that what we've got is a series of linear processes. At any one point, if the Board of Ed doesn't ask for it, it doesn't get any further. If the Board of Selectmen votes it down, it doesn't go any further. If the Board of Finance votes it down, it doesn't go any further. What I see us needing is to kind of have a workshop with this and get representatives from each board, something like this, but together and talk about the space needs. To Mr. Bateson's point, unless we get all the boards in there and have that discussion and talk about where it makes sense to expand a little bit more, and maybe it's places where it doesn't, we're putting the Board of Ed in a can't-win situation. We always beat them up for asking for too much and complain they didn't cut enough and complain that they actually added to the budget. And now we're looking from a facility standpoint. Now, I'd argue that there are two different issues. One's an operating budget year to year, and now we're talking about facilities planning for 50 years. Because if you look, most of our schools, we don't exactly go back and redo them more than once every 50 years. But I think that might be a very healthy exercise, and I would encourage the Board of Ed to consider that, to bring representatives from each of the boards together, to spend some time talking about what the options are, what the projections are, and what the Board of Ed's options are as they go through that. So it's more of an iterative process. It's not just a linear thing where one board votes it down and then it's over. So anyway, for food for thought on that, but I think that was some good points that were raised in this.
Thank you.
I personally agree with the first selectman, and my concern is about when you're timing, when you're planning on bringing that by. If we start having this 462, 504 conversation, a month is going to go by. Like, what one of the boards, whether it's our board, the Board of Selectmen, or the RTM, all it takes them says, we want to see new numbers next month, and you've blown this current fiscal year, and you're off for an entire year. So my thought would be to try to start the process maybe a little earlier, so that if there is a postponement or something like that, because we're trying to figure it out, that you're not blowing 12 months.
Yeah. And if we don't have that discussion as a group ahead of time, at some point that will come up at every single board meeting as we go through and review this. It's kind of like when we agreed on paving and we're going to take it out of bonding and put it in the budget, we did that. But then we didn't have that discussion anymore. We understand we're not going to pave it. We understand it's in the budget, so that's where we expect to see it. And that doesn't become a philosophical discussion every time we're presenting paving.
And we're happy to do that and happy to move the project faster if that's what's necessary. These numbers are based on no redistricting.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Just so you know. I'm not, by the way, optimistic that the redistricting group can come up with a solution that's really palatable to the community and that would save enough money to justify that. When you add in some additional costs that often go along with redistricting, you end up with grandfathering costs and a lot of other headaches and busing and so on and so forth. But I think the board felt that they needed to take a look at it. If nothing else, then to just say, we looked at it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But we can certainly start having the discussions about the issue that was just raised while that's going on.
Okay. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Becker.
Thank you. And I'll try to make this quick because we've been on this for a while, and it is ultimately under the board's purview of what you bring forward and what we either deny or approve or try to adjust. But I do have a couple of questions. Just on the state, on that 2.6, is that before or after state reimbursement? Yeah, the 2.6 million you
That
referenced.
was the gross, right?
Between the two that would be saved.
That was the gross, pre-reimbursement number.
Okay, so the number is significantly lower.
20%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Big
Net,
jump,
the
so-
net reimbursement, about 20%. You know,
Yeah.
the rate's 26, but not everything qualifies. So if you work with a number of about 20, you're pretty close.
Okay. The other thing on the capacity percentages, and this goes back, it's been a while, but I want to say during Woods it was brought up that essentially you guys were finishing a project already in the kind of buffer over your numbers. And you mentioned Dwight in that it's at maybe 80% or thereabouts, and that actually being optimal. And I think in the conversation it would be helpful to sort of always keep in mind that running the real goal is not to max out or to be in your buffer of of where you can, I think it's 20% over or something, like that, but to run the schools optimally. And also when you look, in my view, when you look further down the road, it's not just about school population. Even if school population dipped, if you look at from the course of time, let's say you take a 20-year window, I can think of the amount of programs, heck, even take a a 15-year window since I've been out of the school system. I can think of all the program expansion, both in needs, and we can talk about needs because of college or needs because of special ed, but there's a lot of needs that have come up. And then there's also sort of that maybe demand based upon the population or demographics for a variety of reasons. But these buildings, you know, a classroom or space is eroded from one use and into two uses and all of that. And when I look at a project and we talk about going to an elementary school, I certainly don't assume we're going to go back for anything significant for 20 years, maybe even 30 or longer. Some of these buildings, it took 50 years before we ever came back. And I look at, again, that even 15-year window from when I last experienced it, and I think even beyond that, you know, it doesn't take long before these buildings have many other space issues. So to some extent, just the 504 or whatever other number or whatever other space you want to build in, I would just hope that the Board of Ed is and that committee is keeping that in mind, in that we want to just make sure that we're being careful and planning for the future in all those regards. So that's sort of just my sense on there, and hopefully you can bring that forward and at least to that committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I want to thank everybody for coming out again tonight. I appreciate
Thank you.
your time and your preparation. Mr. Mayor, thank you and your team. Mr. Cullen, you and yours. I appreciate it all. I know we all do. The Board of Finance has another meeting this month in about 2 weeks' time to review the fourth quarter. So tune in, same bat time, same bat channel. Do we have a motion? Mr. Mottola seconded. Mr. Walsh, all in favor of adjournment? All opposed? Good night, everybody, and thank you.
See you. You have a good summer? Not bad.
It's nice that school started.